And good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Now TV and Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And, last week I shared with you some really exciting, really challenging, and very important material about the challenge of Christ and entrance into the most holy place. Now, how does this subject of entering into the most holy place? Now, let me remind you, entering into the most holy place is entering into heaven. Or to put it even another way, entering into the most holy place is entering into the presence of God. Very quick recapitulation of what we saw last week. Man on earth was in the presence of God. Through sin, he was cast out of the presence of God. Under the law of Moses, God had Israel build a tabernacle. That tabernacle represented God's presence on earth. However, there was a holy place, and between the holy place and the most holy place, there was a veil. And no one could go into the most holy place, which represented the presence of God. There's the mercy seat, which represented the very presence of God. But no man could go into the presence of God, into the most holy place, except the high priest on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. That old covenant system, the temple, with the priesthood, the sacrifices, the holy place, the veil, and the most holy place were all types and shadows of what was to come. That's according to Hebrews chapter 9, verses 6 to 10. The writer of Hebrews tells us, as he describes the Day of Atonement practices, in which the high priest killed the sacrifice, he went into the most holy place to offer the blood, and he returned to announce salvation. Sacrifice accepted. So the writer says, all of these things are, some translations say, these things are a type, or these things are a figure. Well, the original Greek has these things are a parable. So the writer is laying side by side the Day of Atonement practices and the work of Jesus Christ. He tells us Christ had appeared at the end of the ages, the suntelia tu aeoniou, the consummation of the ages. And he had appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Well, guess what he's doing? He's echoing directly Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, which has been the focus of our study for several months now. 70 weeks are determined to put away sin. Jesus Christ came to fulfill Daniel chapter 9. Now, some people say, well, that means the 70 weeks were fulfilled at the cross, at the time of the cross. It means no such thing. And don't forget, I have produced a multi-session DVD series entitled, When Did or Will the 70 Weeks of Daniel 9 Come to an End? You can purchase that on my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. I'm not aware of another study anywhere by anyone that even closely resembles what I have produced. The material will blow your mind, but it's clear. It's powerful, and it's undeniable. So make sure you get a copy of that. Okay. So Christ had appeared at the end of the ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. That is parabolically fulfilled, or the fulfillment of the high priest sacrificing on the Day of Atonement. And the writer says, Hebrews chapter 9, verse 24, that Christ had entered into heaven itself, there to prepare it, and there to offer his sacrifice. That corresponds perfectly, parabolically, with the high priest on the Day of Atonement entering into the most holy place with blood to offer that blood. On the mercy seat, he had to sprinkle the corners, all four corners of the Ark of the Covenant, which again represented the most holy place, represented the very presence of God. And then, just like the high priest had to come out of the most holy place to bring salvation, to announce to the crowd that God had accepted the sacrifice, and although their sins had been remembered, nonetheless, God was not imputing their sins to them. As a young man, I used to hear it said that on the Day of Atonement, God rolled Israel's sins forward. That's not what the text says. It says very emphatically, very explicitly, there is a remembrance made every year of sin. But the blood of bulls and goats cannot take away sin. Hebrews 10:4. So what did God do? He did not impute their sin unto them, even though he, quote, remembered it. An act of pure grace, an act of pure mercy. And Paul talks about how under the old covenant, God did not impute man's sins to them. He was waiting for just the right time for the sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus to be offered. At which time, forgiveness for all of the sins that were under the first covenant, Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11 and following, Hebrews 9:15 specifically, could then be actually removed. The Greek word for forgiveness is aphesin, and it means taken away. That's what forgiveness means. God removing sin from us. So here we have, in perfect parabolic form, the Day of Atonement. And let me remind you again, an awful lot of people say, well, the atonement was completed at the cross. Well, if that's true, then the atonement was completed before Jesus ever went into the most holy place there to offer his sacrifice, to offer his life. And if that's the case, then salvation didn't have to wait until the coming of Christ to be revealed and to be applied. But Hebrews chapter 9, verse 28 is more than explicit. Now unto those who eagerly await him. That's from the Greek word apekdekomai, and it means to those who eagerly, expectantly look for him. He shall appear again the second time, apart from sin, for salvation. Why would Jesus have to come? To bring salvation. The salvation purchased through his sacrifice. But until that second coming, until the parousia, salvation was not applied. Forgiveness was not applied. And look, I've been called the worst sort of heretic for teaching this, and yet it's exactly what the writer of Hebrews is teaching in parabolic form. So what that means is salvation, as just stated, could not be applied until the parousia. That means no man could enter into the presence of God until forgiveness was genuinely applied. Now, let me drive this home by turning to one of my very favorite passages. And I hope I can read this. I didn't bring my glasses in with me this morning. I've got another doctor's appointment to look at my eye, the eye that I had my surgery on, cataract surgery, and figure out why in the world I'm not seeing all that much better. What I've had to do, actually, and the eye is some better, but what I've had to do is take reading glasses, pop the lens out of my left eye in the glasses, and make sure I've got the glasses that help my right eye. It's really weird, and it's really awkward. So I'm having to set up another appointment with another eye doctor, the one that actually does glasses, to say, okay, I got to have a pair of glasses that's not going to mess with my left eye because it is seeing a little better, but it will adjust my right eye so that I can read without having to go, which is really what I'm having to do, or to wear, like I said, the glasses with the right lens in, reading glasses, and the left lens popped out. I found some relief that way. Well, all of that aside, I'm going to try to read now from Hebrews chapter 9, verse 8 and following. The Holy Spirit is indicating this. All of these things are a parable, as we've said. That the way into the holy place, that's the most holy place technically, has not yet been disclosed, while the outer tabernacle, now I want you to notice all of the present tense verbs. This is critical. Hebrews was written in the 60s, well after the cross. So what that means is when the writer says, the Holy Spirit is indicating this, those Day of Atonement practice were a parable, notice this, for the present time. He doesn't say it was a parable for what has already been accomplished. And I understand that Hebrews chapter 9, verse 12, mentions that Christ has obtained eternal salvation. Well, that's right. But he was waiting to come back to apply it. And Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11 says, when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things to come, it is literally of the good things that are about to come. So you see, even the writer, and there's some textual variants here, but nonetheless, the things that are about to come is the better translation. It's the Greek word melo. So the writer emphasizes the Day of Atonement practices under the law, he says, are, present active, a shadow, they're a type, they're a parable of the present time, in which are, present tense, offered gifts and sacrifices, which cannot make the one offering, present, offering the sacrifices perfect. But to continue the reading, it is a symbol for the present time, according to which both gifts and sacrifices are, present tense, are offered, which cannot make the worshiper perfect in regard to the conscience, since they relate only to food and drinks, various washings, regulations for the body imposed, and that's epikaimai. And it means exactly what the word indicates. The cultus, the Old Covenant cultus, was imposed. And it was currently still functioning. And in its still functioning, present active indicative form, it was imposed in the writer's present time, but imposed until the time of Reformation. And then he says, but when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that are coming, the good things that are about to come. It is not, unfortunately, as some translations render it, a high priest of the good things that have already come. No, because he goes right ahead in chapter 10, verse 1 and 2, now the law, having a shadow of the good things that are about to come. So we've got the parable of the time now present. We've got all these present active indicatives, and we've got the statement that Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that are about to come, and people want to say, they want to lean on a translation that says of the good things that have already come, and totally ignore chapter 10, verse 1, and all the present tenses, and all the parabolic meaning of the then present time. Look, folks, the context virtually demands that Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that are about to come, because that agrees with chapter 10, verse 1, and it agrees with the parabolic significance of the time now present. And all of those present active indicatives. But do you catch the power of what the writer is saying? Now, at this point, let me ask you a question. I was raised in the environment, the theological environment, that said and says, it still teaches this today, the standard operating procedure or doctrine in the churches of Christ, my background fellowship, is that even when a faithful child of God dies today, they cannot go to heaven. They cannot go to the most holy place. Why? Oh, well, we're told, because the judgment hasn't taken place. Okay. Why? Oh, well, we're told because Christ hasn't come. Well, look what the writer of Hebrews says. Once again, verse 9. Those sacrifices, that cultus, that temple, as long as it was still standing. Now, let me point out something from the Greek here. That word standing there is from the Greek word stazon, and it means having standing. So the writer says, as long as the old covenant system, as long as the old covenant law, the old covenant cultus with its sacrifices, as long as it was still valid, having standing, the writer says it was a symbol for the present time. Its present standing was a symbol, a parable for the present time. Now watch this. This is extremely, extremely important. Accordingly, both gifts and sacrifices are, again, present, are offered, which cannot make the worshiper perfect in regard to conscience, since they relate only to food and drink and various washings and regulations for the body imposed until the time of Reformation. Now, let me read down through verse 11 and 12 fully. When Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things to come, he entered through the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this creation. Boy, I'd like to expound on that for a long time, but I can't. Notice verse 12. And not through the blood of bulls and goats, but through his own blood. He entered the holy place once for all, having obtained eternal inheritance. So what do we find here? That on the cross, Christ paid the sacrifice. But he entered into the most holy place, there to prepare it for his followers. Because as Hebrews chapter 6, 19 and 20 says, Christ is the forerunner. He is the pioneer who has entered into that which is within the veil. And the Greek word that is used there means literally the pioneer, the one who's gone before. He went to prepare the most holy place for those who would follow. Now, hang on to that, okay? Now the writer of Hebrews chapter 9 is telling us, as long as the old covenant cultus, the animal sacrifices, what have you, the priesthood, stood imposed, still had standing, no man could enter into the most holy place. Why? Well, because the blood of bulls and goats can never take away sin. Hebrews chapter 10, 1-4. But again, watch this. Verse 13. Once again, for if the blood of bulls and goats for if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctifies to the purifying of the flesh. Now, let me just stop there for just a moment. He's referring now to the ashes of the red heifer. I can't take a lot of time on this. How many times do you hear people talk about, oh, well, some farmer down in Texas sent 8, 9, or 10 red heifers to Jerusalem, and the rabbis are keeping them there Because guess what? We've got to have the ashes of a red heifer to sanctify, to purify the coming messianic temple for the millennium. Listen, folks, you got to catch the power of what I'm about to say. The ashes of the red heifer are taken directly from the law of Moses, right? Nobody disputes that. Nobody. And yet the very people who say we've got to have the ashes of a red heifer to sanctify a yet future coming messianic temple, to purify it so that the priest can likewise be purified with the ashes of a red heifer so that they can offer acceptable sacrifices. What are they saying? They're saying the law of Moses remains in effect. But wait a minute. The writer of Hebrews says, if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a red heifer sanctifies to the purifying of the flesh those who have been defiled, in other words, it did not cleanse the conscience through forgiveness. That's why, point number one, as long as there was no genuine forgiveness applied to those who were making the animal sacrifices, their conscience could not be clean, and they could never go into the most holy place because their sins were not legitimately taken away. Ephesians. Oh, wait a minute. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling those who have been defiled sanctifies for the cleansing of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Jesus Christ, now please pay careful attention. How much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish, just like the red heifer, you see, to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. The ashes of a heifer could never sanctify the spirit, never sanctify the heart, the conscience, could never bring forgiveness. Sanctified the flesh. But let me reiterate, folks, all of those who tell us we're waiting for the perfect, unblemished red heifer, and yet who turn around and tell us the law of Moses has been done away with, are engaged in a massive, self-contradictory, fatal contradiction. Because here's the deal. The ashes of a red heifer could never take away sin, meaning that man could never enter into the most holy place as long as the law of Moses was imposed, as long as the law of Moses stood valid. Are you following me here? Do you catch the power of this? It is totally awesome. Now then, I asked you a question a moment ago, started to. What is your belief concerning what happens to man, a faithful child of God? What is your belief about what happens to the child of God when we die? Well, like I mentioned, I was raised in a theological environment that says, we go to Abraham's bosom. Why? Well, because the judgment hasn't taken place. Christ hasn't come. Hang on. Romans chapter 11, 25 to 27 says that at Christ's coming, his parousia, he would take away sin. Wait a minute, I thought he died to take away sin. That's right. He died to do it. He would come back to apply it. Wait a minute. Are you following me? Do you see the train coming? If man could not enter into the most holy place, point number one, because there was no forgiveness, And if Christ was to return to bring forgiveness, thus allowing man to enter into the most holy place, what does that mean today if you or I say, when a faithful child of God dies, they go to heaven? And look, folks, that's the majority view of evangelical Christianity. I've been asking believers of all stripes, dispensational, amillennial, postmillennial, what happens to the faithful child of God when they die? Almost invariably, we go to heaven. Folks, let me reiterate this. As long as the old covenant stood, there was no forgiveness. As long as the old covenant stood valid and imposed, no man could enter into the most holy place. The law of Moses would stand until the time of Reformation. The time of Reformation is when man could enter into the most holy place, but the time when man could enter into the most holy place is when Christ would return to bring salvation, i.e., entrance into the most holy place. So let me say again, if you say, and if you believe that when a faithful child of God dies today, and if and when you say, well, the law of Moses has been taken away, you are effectively, you are logically, you are scripturally, based upon Hebrews chapter 9, you are saying of absolute logical necessity, Christ has come again, the second time, apart from sin, and he has brought salvation. I'm sorry, folks, it's absolutely unavoidable. I'm sorry, you just can't take the position that we go to heaven when we die. And to follow up a question, do you believe that Christians today are actually, legitimately, objectively forgiven of sin through the blood of Christ? The huge majority of people, even those in my fellowship that I came from, who say we have to go to Hades, they say, oh, well, I can't say yes or no. Some say yes. If you say we're forgiven, we get to enter the most holy place. I'm out of time. See you next week.